And the most recent one was Nassim Taleb. And you described October 7 as a surprise attack. And indeed, it was a surprise attack. But to refer to it as in terms of a black swan, as Taleb would say, I think would not be appropriate, because it's, after all, it's perfectly predictable that the people living under occupation for so many decades would end up reacting in such a violent, horrendous way. You wrote a lot about Frantz Fanon, about violence, about reactions to oppression. So indeed, it was perceived by the Israelis as a pogrom, and it was to a large extent a crime against humanity and a pogrom, but it's also something that was predictable. What is today difficult to predict is the position in the next few months of the main regional actors, who are going to be the main winners and the main losers. And yesterday you told me something that I found interesting and counterintuitive. You told me that you think in the short term, Iran appears to be the main beneficiary of what is happening, because the attacks put an end to the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But you also think that in the medium or long term, Saudi Arabia could end up emerging as a potential winner, because it will be in a good position to extract lots of concessions from the Israelis and from the United States if it wants to resume this normalization process. So at this stage, to what extent do you think that Iran and Saudi Arabia are playing their cards correctly? And then we will move on to discussing the Lebanese situation.
So it's very quick. I mean, tackling the Lebanese situation. But let me, before answering your question, just say that I disagree with the position of Mr. Talib. We teach for a long time, that structural violence will lead eventually, should lead eventually to a revolt. And a lot of sociologists have been writing on that. But still, from the political point of view, an unexpected attack in terms of monitoring the frontiers and trying to assess the position of the so-called enemy has to be, on all the time in the making. So they missed, the Israelis missed that point. And still, Pearl Harbor was a strategic surprise. Look at what happened to the Israeli army on 1973. It's the same kind of political surprise or strategic surprise. But I won't discuss that. There is a point of view of political strategists, and the other one is very narrowed sociologist approach to violence. But let me go to your question. Your question was, who are the beneficiary of this war till now? It is very difficult to draw out lessons from the 7th of October. But it seems to me that before going into the beneficiary, I think that the Palestinians are the great beneficiary, if I might say, Karim, because the idea of a Palestinian state is back on the agenda. And this is big news. This is, to emerge, the idea of a Palestinian state emerging from oblivion and being put on the agenda and being used as a basis on which you have to dwell in order to envisage or to work out a way out of the crisis. This is brand new. And this is not the position of South Africa or Colombia or Sri Lanka. It is the United States that are working on that. And there is an awareness that unless you give a solution that will be really rooted deeply in having a Palestinian state, you won't have peace in this region. And I think that this is really the turning point. Having the idea on the table does not mean that the implementation will follow immediately. It will take maybe 2 or 3 years, but everybody has come to understand that this is the horizon that starting from which or upon which you have to envisage the whole thing. Now, the beneficiary, if I might say, the negative one, if I might say, and try to qualify that, is the Iranian. The Iranian state has been able to derail the whole process of the Abraham Agreement. Now, I'm saying that it is Iran. A lot of people will say no. For example, Hassan Nasrallah is saying that all what some people are deemed to be proxies are completely autonomous and then decide by themselves. But at one point, I mean, the process of normalization in the region brought about by the agreement, which was called the Abraham Agreement in September 2020, has been successfully, for the moment, totally derailed. Nobody is speaking about that. And the people that are working on a peace plan are just trying to sort out a plan in which the idea of Palestinian state would be back again in the plan in the Abraham Accords. The second one, yes, it is paradoxically maybe the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because they are silent. They have come to understand that this was not the time to jump in and to join the Abraham agreements, but they are willing more and more to be part of a great vision. You cannot have the 2030 vision in the Gulf area and completely forget about what's happening in the Near East. So I think that have come to understand that there is a linkage policy that should be put forth in order to stabilize the whole region. You cannot have a Gulf area living in a normal way, if I might say, do his big business as usual, and on the other hand, on the other part of the Mediterranean, the war was still going on. So I think that this is also a kind of lesson or a kind of a wisdom statement that could be drawn from this war in order to understand that everything is linked. And you said, Karim, at the very beginning, that the Palestinian issue is one of universal repercussion, but it is mainly one of linking all the conflicts that are happening in the region. Look at the way the Houthi has joined. The Golan Heights has been part of the conflict. Hassan Nasrallah in the southern part of Lebanon, the Iraqi Hezbollah, sorry. The West Bank is joining also the whole thing. And Israel is compelled to fight on so many regions. So the linkage policy, this was a consequence of this war that Hamas has launched on the eve of 7th of October. Now, there is a question I'm not going to answer to tackle the whole question there. Is what was the will, what was the intention of Hamas on the 7th of October? Was it to derail the peace process? So they should have a diplomacy, but we cannot say today what is the impact of the political consequences from the point of view of the Hamas concerning the event that they have contributed to create. Was it a lack of coordination between what we have been told by Hassan Nasrallah, for example, that there was a unity of all fronts? And then we have come to discover that there was a support, a front that support, and a front that is very much active. So was it a lack of coordination? Was it this I mean, from the point of view of Hamas, it was really from the military point of view, it was a big success. But what about the political consequence for Hamas and for the Palestinian question? I'm putting these questions because I'm sure that historians will put the question, try to give an answer to that, but it is too early to tell. We don't have all the details concerning this attack.
What you just said gives me a perfect transition to discuss Lebanon. You mentioned the debate over Iranian proxies who claim not to be proxies, but to have their own agency. And we are witnessing this as we speak, because 48 hours ago, the Iranian foreign minister seemed to say that Iran was ruling out escalation, was doing its best to show restraint and to avoid going to war. And yet, less than 24 hours later, we had two fiery speeches, one by Hassan Nasrallah and one by Bibi Netanyahu. Are you pessimistic? Do you think that Lebanon could once again pay the price of these regional confrontations? What should be the most appropriate Lebanese strategy to maintain national cohesion and at the same time to avoid giving Israel a new pretext to wage a devastating war on Lebanon? It is quite complicated at this stage because many people argue that Israel, for domestic political reasons, could be tempted to widen this war and to attack South Lebanon. In your views, are the Iranians and the Hezbollah really sincere when they say that they are not looking for a confrontation? And do you see a risk that Israel, in some sort of a fuite en avant, of a headlong rush, would attack Lebanon preemptively to destroy the so-called Redwan forces that could represent a threat to Israel?
Karim, the risk is here to stay. One cannot just get rid of the idea that the risk is there. We have already, I'm talking for Lebanon, I mean, Lebanon has already suffered for severe damages that has been made by the shelling of the Hezbollah, of the southern region. The French, but the United States also are very much worried about what could be the consequences of such a war. Of course, nobody, no. I think that Hezbollah is not willing to go out for a war because it would cost a lot, and it would cost a lot in terms of the internal price that you have to pay for that. There's a lot of advantages that Hezbollah has already gained in Lebanon. I mean, leading the political system, being the only force that has a prevailing say in Lebanese politics. You cannot risk all that just in order to be a front of support to Gaza. So I think that Hezbollah is very wise in terms of rationality in the way he is conducting this war or trying to bomb, but without being involved in a broader conflict. That is the most important thing, and I think that he is sticking to that. But on the other hand, the problem is from the Israeli point of view. And we have people in Israel like Netanyahu, like the Smotrich, like the Ben Gvir, that are really backing the people of the north, the Israeli people of the northern part of Israel, saying we want them to return back to their villages, to their towns, and taking, I mean, just a cause that is, maybe it is important, of course, for the people to be to go back to their home, but it is from the point of view of the extremists in the government of Ben Netanyahu a rare opportunity to get rid, if I might say, of course, of the Hezbollah. But how can you do that? I mean, the only idea that everybody is working on today is not to get rid of the Hezbollah, is to make the Hezbollah withdraw on quite a distance of 10 or 8 or 10 kilometers in the southern part of the Litani River, and not cross the river and be on the other side of the river, as it is stated in the 7001 resolution of the United Nations. So I think that we have to have a very close look to the debate that is going on in Israel. And here is the very risky play or game that Hezbollah is playing, because they're saying at the same time we are just retaliating or responding, but at the same time there is a provocative movement also, because yesterday it was the shelling of Safad, and Safad is far away from the 10 kilometers that has been agreed upon in order to exchange the shelling and the bombing. So the intention not to go to war is here, but the risk is to give an argumentation, a pretext, a cause that could be a fake cause, I don't know, just in order for the extremists of the Netanyahu cabinet to take the opportunity to dwell on that and immediately launch a kind of war, a mini war on Lebanon. This is the risk.
Yeah, this rise of extremism in Israel, but also this rise simultaneously of Hezbollah's hubris and arrogance and willingness to sort of hijack the entire Lebanese agenda, is bringing very serious discussions today about the future of the Lebanese political system itself. So I would like to discuss with you the future of the Lebanese institutions, of the Lebanese system, and of the Ta'if Accords more precisely, considering that you are one of the first academics who published extensively on Ta'if. If I remember correctly, at the time you said that Ta'if was not a solution to the Lebanese dysfunctional political system, but could be une passerelle vers la solution, a pathway towards a solution, not a solution, but a pathway towards a solution. So the question today, do you think that Ta'if could still offer this pathway if it is properly implemented? Because we know that almost none of its clauses has been implemented, neither desectarianization, nor the creation of a Senate, nor decentralization. The Syrian occupying forces rejected a correct application of Ta'if. There was this famous book by Albert Mansour, Al-Inqilab ala Ta'if. And after this coup against Ta'if, you also had the Doha Agreement, which introduced new mechanisms that were also heresies from a judicial perspective. And we took this weird Lebanese habit of forming so-called national unity governments that often become governments of national paralysis. So today, do you think it's too late to suggest that Ta'if could still be implemented? With all its flaws, we have to remember that Ta'if was supported by the international community. It is still supported by the United States, France, Saudi Arabia. It was endorsed by the Maronite Patriarch, Cardinal Sfer at the time. Discussing another political system today, considering the balance of power, which is heavily in favor of Hezbollah, would be quite dangerous. So in your views, with 30 years of, in retrospect, do you think that the Ta'if Accord is dead? Is it in a coma? Is it possible to revive it? And what would be the possible alternatives to Ta'if?
Lot of questions, numerous one, very difficult one, but let me make a couple of comments, very short, very quickly. First of all, Ta'if is no longer Ta'if. Ta'if is the Lebanese constitution. Second point, Ta'if is not a reform. It's not a political reform. It's a kind of agreement that has been favored by the United States. You mentioned it, by France, by Syria also, mainly Syria, supported also by Saudi Arabia, in order to put an end to the war. So the most important agreement is that Ta'if was very much successful, if I might say, in putting an end to the war. But it has fostered, and this I have written on that extensively, as you said, it has fostered the communitarian system. It has not brought about the needed change in order to envisage another Lebanon, which would go out from the communitarian system. So, but for the moment being, and this is my third very short comment, for the moment being, I might surprise you, Karim, we need Ta'if. We need Ta'if because it is the only instrument, if I might say, left in our hand in order to settle the immediate conflict. I'm not having a look on the future, on the long run. It is for the immediate future, we have to have an election, presidential election. We have to have a new government that is worthy of the name, because the government we have is unworthy of the name of government. It's no longer a caretaker. It's a government that is really playing by the ear and not by the book, as Fuad used to say, uh, by the constitution. So we have to have that from the very beginning. I know also, Karim, because we have been discussing this issue many times, that there is also a new split in the Lebanese society today, or at the political level, of course, between people who are very much favoring an idea of federation or confederation or a system of canton. I don't know exactly how to phrase the whole thing. And on the other hand, you have still people sticking to Taif, sticking to the idea that through Taif and with Taif, we would reach a state that would be united in order to discuss the future issues to put on the table. I tell you very bluntly, I'm in favor of the second trend. I mean, for the moment being, keeping our unity, although it is a very hectic one, uh, keeping our unity, trying to solve our immediate constitutional problems. And after that, going to discuss in a very broader way what would be the new vision of the new Lebanon. We'll have plenty of time to do that. But if you want to discuss an issue of having a discussion on neutrality or federation or partition, name it as you want, and at the same time having a stable society, which is a terrible society, which has a very, I mean, difficult in order just to face the day-to-day life in terms of economy, of social problems. You want, I mean, this way will lead nowhere. It's a stalemate from the political point of view and from the constitutional one. I'm not against all these questions that are really that a lot of people are talking about today. But I say that today, this is not the time to think about the future when we are not able to manage the present. I mean, so this is the discussion. Yes, Taif is a pathway to other solutions, because we have two things that are being left in terms of implementation of Taif. Of course, the Senate is one of the points. It would be a small endeavor, but I don't know why. I'm not sure about the way having a Senate will help us to get rid of the communitarian system. Okay, my fear is that we have a Senate today. We will have two houses of representatives that are colored, communitarian colored. I mean, you cannot have a Senate without a sectarian representation, because this is the intention behind creating the Senate. And are we sure that if we go to election out of the communitarian system that is prevailing today, are we sure that the voters are going to vote without having in mind that communitarian affiliation? So we have to be very cautious on that. But we have also the what the idea that in Lebanon we can have a decentralized administrative system. This has to be really tackled and taken into account very seriously. This we can dwell on too. But the other things, I mean, I don't know how we have been dogged down with the system of Doha, saying you have to have a government of national unity. We have totally lost the sense of democracy in this country. We are a sinking democracy. And this is what is frightening me, because I cannot see to which institution we must go or we should go in order to prevent this sinking. The parliament, the president of the republic is no longer here. the government is not the government. So, of course, all the people surrounding us, all the foreign powers, all the people that have, I mean, the states that have an influence in Lebanon is really running in order to see how are we going to be able to get out of this mess. And after that, we are the first to complain about the foreign our internal affairs. So Lebanon needs really, or needs to have a very stable regional situation. And this is not the case, unfortunately.
Thank you, Joseph. This is quite interesting what you are saying, because it's very rational, that the fact that we need Ta'if, that it's difficult in the current context to move beyond Ta'if.
Exactly.
But even those of us who tend to agree with you are finding it increasingly difficult to sell this idea to the new Lebanese generations. Ta'if was voted 35 years ago in 1989 by MPs who were elected 52 years ago in 1972. When Ta'if was voted, Hezbollah was not yet a political actor, has not entered the political fray. It's only in 1992 that they will enter the Lebanese parliament. But today they are still in their official discourse saying that they do agree with Ta'if. So this is perhaps one of the reasons why you think it's important to try to implement Ta'if and decentralization and the other clauses, as long as everyone is still paying lip service to the Constitution, even if they are trampling upon it day after day. The problem is that we have to find a way to make it more aspirational, and to make sure that the new generations realize that all the suggested alternatives are not necessarily viable. And this brings me to one last question before we open the floor to questions from the audience about Lebanese foreign policy. Kulluna Irada will soon organize an event with various stakeholders to discuss Lebanese foreign policy, to discuss the possibilities of moving towards a positive neutrality, الحياة الناشط والإيجابي, to discuss alignment between the various political forces on foreign policy, to make sure that Lebanon is no longer a battling ground for all the regional proxy wars. You have worked on mediation a lot, on proxy wars a lot, even in Africa, in the Great Lakes and elsewhere. If you were to offer some suggestions in a few minutes about what Lebanon's foreign policy should be in the upcoming 10 or 20 years, we would be happy to have your views on this, because we are currently launching a reflection with some partners on this issue.
Very difficult to answer your question in seconds or in minutes, but let me say that I agree and I support totally your idea. We need to have a foreign policy that would be a common policy, that everybody would agree upon that, in order to have a policy that is independent, a foreign policy that is independent, autonomous. We have completely, the foreign policy of Lebanon has completely disappeared, and it has disappeared, alas, to no avail, since the beginning of the 1975 war. Lebanon is a buffer state. I have written on that. And the buffer state has three options. He might stick to one of the party, the neighbor, the powerful neighbor, stick to Israel, for example. We have tried that. Stick to Syria, when we have had the time that was just after the Taif agreement till the withdrawal of the Syrian troops in 2005, I think, yes. And we have the Syrian Wisai, we say, when the Wisai was quite an occupation. And the third position is to be helped by people or by states that could give you a guarantee that nobody will attack you. And today, nobody is able to give you that. Syria is no longer a state. And the padrino of Syria, if I might say, is the Iranian. And Israel is no interested by Lebanon whatsoever, interested in one thing: to have secure borders. And maybe we should reach, if Mr. Hochstein is back again in town someday, and try to draw the coastal border. No, he has the land borders after the coastal borders. Maybe we'll have stability on the borders. But Karim, there is a question that is completely left without answer. Would
Yes.
or will the Hezbollah will agree to leave or to get rid of his weapons and renounce violence? You cannot have a country that have a stability and which have a kind of neutrality, a foreign policy of neutrality, if you don't have a strong army. It's the case of Switzerland, of course. It's the case of L'Autriche, I think, also in the European Union. You have to have an army. And my question is, we cannot do that unless we open a discussion in order to know what is the common ground on which we can agree in order to have a stabilized country, a country that people around the world, state around the world, would be very much in favor of giving some guarantee that it will not be attacked by anybody. But if you have an army inside the country and just next to another army, which is the official one, forget about having an idea of neutrality that would be really effective, relevant, and that can work.
True, Joseph. I just had a message
This
from Farah that
has
some people are finding it difficult to join the Zoom session. We will make sure that we upload it on YouTube as soon as possible with all the other conferences that Kulluna Irada has been organizing. But I think we already have more than 100 persons online. So if you have some friends who are having the technical difficulties, please let them know that it will be online as soon as possible. I have one last question, Joseph, before we move to the audience. Karim Hatem had asked me an important subsidiary question because you also follow France and the United States quite closely. And Karim Hatem was asking me this morning, what do you think will the repercussions be on the US elections that is supposed to take place in a few months? And on French domestic politics, France has taken a hardline pro-Israel stance in the first few months. Now Macron is trying to readjust a little bit. But it appears that this Israeli-Palestinian conflict is becoming a domestic political issue in the United States and in France. So Karim Hatem's question is, what do you think the consequences will be on the US political scene and on the French political scene?
I think that there is a common agreement, and this is the common point between the foreign policy of France and the United States. Lebanon should be kept away from an extension of the war. You might understand this the way you want. I mean, it's because they love Lebanon, because they need to have a stable Lebanon. I don't think so. But there is an agreement in this region that Israel is really putting in jeopardy, is that no extension whatsoever of the war. So I think that without having a specific foreign policy toward Lebanon, the two countries that you mentioned, or the two states that you mentioned, have a common interest in having Lebanon, in averting war, and having Lebanon outside of an extension of the war. It's true that the issue of Palestine and the issue of the Jewish state also has become a problem, an internal problem in both the United States, which was the case. I mean, the United States sticking to Israel and trying to protect Israel. This is brand new for France because France, although being very much protective to its Jewish minority, has an Arab politics that was very well known since the Général de Gaulle, la politique arabe de la France. And it's no longer the case. So things have changed in the region, and both countries are balancing, are trying to strike a balance between their common interest on the internal level and the way they have the way they look to the Middle East, and trying to keep their interest alive in this part of the world and not to put them into jeopardy. So it's a very pragmatic politic. It's not about rhetorics. It's not about theorizing something. It's just to know how to have the good attitude, the just attitude, which is the pragmatic attitude, in order to be followed if you want to preserve your interests.
Thank you, Joe. I see Karim Hatem raising his hand. Karim, do you have a question before we turn to the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to add an addition to the way Karim has formulated the question, which is, yes, on the short term, it is important to know that both US and France do not want an extension of the conflict.
Yeah.
And of course, we're all happy with that.
Yeah.
But there is another perspective, which is the way and the perception of a kind of asymmetry towards Israel by the two major representatives of the Occidental world that are players in the region, may have also as a consequence, first, that Russia, China tomorrow will say, okay, I want to keep Ukraine because I have good reasons, and you have left Israel do what they want in Gaza. So the same is with China. So that's one geopolitical consequence. And the other is the kind of demonetization of bilateral and multilateral policies, in which nationalist candidates, we think, of course, about Marine Le Pen in France, will be in a position to say, you know, I'm the best placed candidate to play in this new world with the rules that people now we perceive are emerging in this world where the rule of law is kind of demonetized. I mean, we are all in a way very much affected, and it goes back to your introduction, Joseph, by the kind of very light way that we talk about the tens of thousands of deaths in Gaza. I mean, it's like these people did not, it's just numbers. We're not talking about people, and this also gives a sort of asymmetry, which demonetizes the feeling of trust in international institutions.
Yeah.
Yes,
no,
you
right.
bring to mind Karim Stalin's horrible quote when he said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. Today we are approaching the stage where what is happening in Gaza, even though we are approaching 30,000 deaths and 100,000 victims, is becoming some sort of background noise, and people are getting used to it. And this brings me to a question being asked on the Zoom chat by Dr. Mayad Sleiman. She's asking if you see any risk of Palestinians being moved to Lebanon. Some people mentioned an idea that was allegedly floated by Qatar, that some Hamas leader would be relocated to Lebanon. I asked a few diplomats, and they said they were skeptical because the Israelis would not want them in Lebanon. But if the situation, the bombing of Rafah continues, do you think that there is a genuine risk of ethnic cleansing, meaning Egypt being forced to take hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees in exchange for a few dozen billions of dollars? And if that is the case, would Lebanon might also witness the arrival of a new wave of Palestinian refugees, considering the traumas of the civil war are still very much present?
A very old idea that has been implemented in the early 30s, when there was this politics between Turkey and Greece. It was called at that time people engineering, l'ingénierie des peuples, exchanging people from this side to the other. For the moment being, I can't see Egypt accepting to have Palestinian people coming to Sinai and settling over there. It would be, I mean, unbearable from the point of view of President Sisi, unbearable from the point of view of Arab awareness. You cannot do that to the Palestinian any longer. We are no longer in 1948 or in 1967, because it was the second Nakba, the 1967 people are forgetting this aspect. So Israel is willing, but I've noticed that Netanyahu and Ben Gvir said, well, the problem is not for the Palestinians to go to Lebanon or to go to an Arab country. The world is so wide, they can go to Canada. I don't know why they mentioned Canada, but they're trying to have a broad array of countries that could be very much helpful in accepting and hosting and having the Palestinians.
There was even an article in Haaretz mentioning an official memo studying the possibility of sending Palestinians to Congo, all the way to Congo. Apparently, some Israeli policy circles taking advantage of their economic relations with the DRC went so far as imagining shipping them off to Congo. This
I cannot see it happen in the Middle East. That was my answer to the question.
Yes. There is a sensitive question, a sensitive but important questions asked by Philippe Idde on Zoom. He's a member of National Bloc, and he's asking, do you think that Israel only wants to secure its borders, or does Israel still has an interest in Lebanon? I assume he's mentioning Lebanese resources south of the Litani. It was an old message of Remo Iddes that there is an Israeli threat on Lebanon regardless of Hezbollah and before Hezbollah's emergence. But today we live in a new world, and many people argue that Israel's main objective is to prevent Hezbollah from attacking them. So do you view Israel as a threat in itself? Does Lebanon need a deterrent against a potential Israeli aggression, or is it only Hezbollah's provocations that are leading Israel to attack Lebanon?
No. I think that it's Philippe.
Of the Bloc National.
Yes, Philippe. I'm thinking that Philippe is right. I mean, for Lebanon is in the eyes of the storm from the point of view of Israel. It is a country that has multiple dimensions, be it culture, be it political consociativeness and things like that. And it will be very much monitored by the Israelis in order to see what are the trends in terms of cultural movements, political movements, Arab nationalism or Syrian nationalism, or nationalism that stick to Lebanese nationalism. But I won't agree by saying this was an idea that has been put forth by Raymond Eddy. You're right, but it was about the issue of water, the issue of delineating the southern borders of Lebanon. It was typically an issue that has been on the agenda between the 30s and the 50s. But I think that the Israeli mind, if we might speak about an Israeli mind, is, and it will be more and more the case, is very much driven by security, fostering its security, fostering its stability in terms of preventing any attack like what happened on the 7th of October. So for the moment being, we can forget about it. Maybe we resume the discussion someday, but for the moment being, it is mainly a major security dominated policy that would be really the idea that would trigger a bunch of confidence measures, security arrangements or accommodations, especially in the Lebanese.
I see George Saadi raising his hand, but before giving the floor to George, let me read a few comments on the chat. Tim Kais is thanking you for your insightful presentation, and he's making only a remark that Lebanon is not a country, it's not even a nation, it has no delineated territory, it remains, it is crumbling, it remains an idea. And this also brings us back to Kamal Salibi, a house of many mansions. Can we build a state that would ultimately become a nation? This was Fuad Shahab's dream that is still a dream. But there's no question on Tim's.
No, but Karim, do you think that Switzerland is a nation? Do you think that Belgium is a nation? I don't want to build a nation.
Right.
I don't want to build up a nation. I want to build up a polity in which people will live all together in a peaceful way, abiding by the rules, and having a state of law that is prevailing, and law is equal to all of the people living on the Lebanese soil. After that, I mean, the comments is very, I mean, relevant and just. After that, we would sometimes thinking this was the idea of Michel Chiha. I mean, when we will get rid of the communitarian ones, and then we might think about becoming a nation. But for the moment being, we are une fédération de communautés, a federation of communities. So let us accept this first step and not enter in a continuous circle, a vicious circle, of course, of wars and contests and violences.
Yes, absolutely. We have dozens of questions literally on Zoom. I'll try to summarize the questions. Michael Shaheen is asking about the Sunni Arab world's opinion on this. Do you think that the solidarity with the Palestinian question, I'm trying to rephrase the question because it's quite long. Basically, there is solidarity with Palestinians, but there is also a willingness to reduce Iran's influence in the region. I'm trying to skim through the question. I'll skim and basically get the gist of the questions and then give you the opportunity to answer all the questions together. Someone is also, Dori Renno is asking if this war is only an Israeli-Hamas war, or is it a war for power balance between Iran and its proxies? And we're heading towards a new geo-economical competition. Then we have also Dori asking, saying that he agrees with you on the preservation of Ta'if as a pathway. Shireen is saying we are surprised by the unfiltered messages conveyed by Israeli leaders. Indeed, we have heard horrendous rhetoric comparing Palestinians to human animals and all sorts of incendiary rhetoric. How do we deal with this? I'm not sure we have an answer. The entire Middle East needs to be de-radicalized. The word de-radicalization is often used about the Muslim world, but it could also be applied to Israel. Then Malik is asking if this war could be, if the consequence could be a rapprochement between Iran and the United States that could lead to a presidential election in Lebanon. So this is basically, I'm trying to summarize the question on the chat, and let me also give the floor to George Saadi to ask you the questions directly. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to unmute.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, hello. So I'm not hearing you. Jihan, can you unmute Dr. Saadi?
You have to unmute.
Yes, your co-host now, you can speak. But I think you're still on mute.
Okay, now you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, I'm going to be very, very quick. Thank you, Kulluna Irada and Change Lebanon for this very, very valuable conference. I would say it's one of very few times we learn things. So, Maila, thank you for your analysis. You succeeded to convince me. I have been dragging my convictions about federalism since years, since my childhood, maybe. For the first time, I'm convinced to freeze this conviction. You are right. It's not the time to talk about the future. Let's talk about the past, consolidate. And Taif will be a passerelle, as we did. Thanks a lot. So I don't have any other question. I didn't find any question intelligent enough to up to the level that you have raised in this. So I'm going to shut up and listen and keep learning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, George. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for this comment. Joseph, regarding the questions that I raised, this incendiary rhetoric in Israel, the possibility of an Iranian-US rapprochement, can Lebanon benefit from this rapprochement if there is a regional deal, or can we be once again the victims of a deal that would happen at our expense? We are very often not sitting around the negotiation table, but we are only on the menu. Do you view the situation today as the situation in 1990, when Lebanon was given almost entirely actually to Hafiz al-Assad in exchange for his participation in the first Gulf War? If Hezbollah agrees to demilitarize south of the Litani, are they likely to demand increased control on the rest of the Lebanese political system?
Yes, thank you, Karim. Many questions. I will try to answer the first question that has been put around the reaction of the Sunni world, of the Arab Sunni world. I teach often in Morocco. I've been on a conference recently in Tunisia. I have to go to Jordan. Wherever I go, and especially when I talk to our Arab students at ESSEC, for example, or the students I meet here in Paris, I'm struck by the idea that all these people, all these young people, do not agree with the policy or the politics of their government. So this is really a very sharp discrepancy between public opinion in the Arab world and the government of the Arab world. Each time, I'm really surprised each time to know or to witness or to be very much aware by people saying we don't agree, we don't like this foreign policy of our country. So there is a feeling within the Arab world that this is the wrong way to deal with the Palestinian issue. And I'm sure that the political leadership, the Arab political leadership, is very much afraid about the reaction of its public opinion. We know by the confidence that you can have, or the secret, sorry, that we can have from the discussions that are going on between European head of states and Arab leaders. And they're stating their fears not to be in control of the public opinion. That's why there is a common agreement of having immediately a ceasefire. Okay, and I think that this, if it is going to last, would constitute a real risk to the Arab leadership and to the Arab government fold.
This divide between Arab public opinion and the Arab leadership is indeed quite flagrant and egregious. We had an example recently when the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a think tank very close to Israel, published an opinion poll about Saudi Arabia, indicating that more than 96% of the Saudis oppose, not only do they oppose normalization, but they would also be in favor of cutting all relations, entering into BDS, etc. And to a certain extent, lesser extent, perhaps it's also true even in Dubai. So I think that indeed Hamas managed to stop this normalization process. However, yesterday there was an interesting article in Foreign Affairs published by Bernard Haikal, a political scientist who has inside access to Saudi leaders, and he said that Saudi Arabia could re-enter the normalization process if it obtains significant concessions. So this is why what you were saying earlier, and which is counterintuitive, that in the longer term, the Saudis could end up benefiting from this, makes total sense. I see Marie raising her hand. Marie Hbai'a, Jihan, can we also unmute her so she can ask her question? Tu peux y aller, Marie. Marie, I think you're co-host now. You can ask your question. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, yes. Yes, hello. In French? Yeah, no, in English. So thank you for
Language.
all these
For
very...
a question, all languages are accepted in the Q&A.
Exactly. Please,
Okay,
please
so
feel at
bon,
ease. Yes, please.
je vais pas tester mon chinois, mais je commence en français.
Allez,
Merci beaucoup pour
je
toutes ces
réponds.
informations. Alors, j'aimerais comprendre, de votre point de vue, est-ce que c'est possible de faire des réformes politiques dans un pays au Liban sans s'occuper du volet économique et financier? Ça, c'est ma première question. Et la deuxième question, c'est, tel que je le conçois, il y a trois, sinon plus, grandes familles de mafia qui aujourd'hui essayent d'instaurer un statu quo au Liban. La mafia, désolé pour le mot, mais la mafia politique, la mafia financière et au milieu, une sorte de banque centrale qui gère un peu les finances. Comment est-ce qu'on peut débloquer ce statu quo? Ça, c'était ma deuxième question.
Oui, alors en parallèle, Joseph, je
Merci.
vais te poser une question qui est posée par notre collègue Sibyl Riz sur le chat sur ce discrepancy between public opinion and leadership in the Arab world. Do you think it's also true in the West? We are seeing increasingly pro-Palestinian solidarity movements in various countries, but governments remain firmly behind Israel. So I assume you will respond to this, that public opinion is really divided, that there are culture wars on this issue in every single country. But do you think that sooner or later Western leaders will have to change their unconditional support for Israel because the Palestinian spokespersons are now more active and present on social media, and there is an increasing support, particularly among the youth in the United States and among the supporters of the Democratic Party?
Where shall I begin, Karim, in order to answer?
There is one more question by Ramzi Saad, and then you'll answer everything you can at the same time. We still have some minutes. So Ramzi Saad is saying that it's becoming crystal clear that Netanyahu and his messianic coalition are targeting, their objective is to expel many Palestinians to Egypt, Jordan, Canada, or elsewhere. Does the US have the capacity to stop this disastrous project, or will pro-Israel pressure groups lead to the United States continuing to give a blank check to the Israelis? And also a question from Randa Tinji. I'm rephrasing, if the Arab governments are so timid so far, can we suppose that the Israelis are threatening the Arab regimes? I'm sorry if I'm misphrasing your questions, but I'm trying to take as many questions as possible and to summarize them. We also have Nawal Maoushi, thanks for being with us, saying that they talk of Palestinian people like they would talk of merchandise. Indeed, not even merchandise. They are comparing them to animals. And she correctly mentions Theodor Herzl's Uganda project of 1903. They called it the Uganda, but actually it was supposed to send them to Kenya. So we have the impression, Joseph, to summarize these questions, that the past is never dead, that the colonial mindset that was present at the end of the 19th century in Europe, at the time when the Zionist project was born, is still very much dominant in Western societies today. And how should we, as Middle Easterners, confront this? This is my own question, but feel free to respond to anything you might have noted in the series of questions that I summarized.
Yes, many questions. Thank you, Karim. It is a time for me just to remember to give a conseil de lecture. I would advise you to read the very interesting book of Stefan Zweig called The Monde d'hier. Yeah, it's a wonderful book, and it reminds me about the whole atmosphere that is prevailing today in cultural trends and political trends and questions around how to reshape the whole region. And these question was the question that Stefan Zweig has in mind when he wrote this book. And after that came the war, the First World War, and everything was completely reviewed, reshaped, reshuffled in terms of new countries, new nations that have just appeared after the Treaty of Versailles and Trianon. It was very interesting. I think that we are witnessing today a total remake of the map. Okay, but the remake of the map does not need to have new countries or creating new entities. It is about the way we are looking at things, the new ideas. Somebody has talked about de-radicalization. I cannot see it immediately because de-radicalization happened in a society in which you cannot feel you are not integrated, and you have a de-radicalization, a radicalization that is going on, and you try to de-radicalize. We have this particularity in the Middle East, a very broad coexistence between the secular, between the religious. Look at the debate that is, it's very instructive. I mean, to see the debate that is going on in Israel. They are now integrating ultra-Orthodox people in the army. This has not, nobody would have thought about that, 4 months ago. So things are moving. Look about the experience of Ranouchi in Tunisia, and the way he is really cooling down, calming down, and trying to have a social Christian democracy or Muslim democracy like the Italian used to have one once. So ideas are changing. And I've read the very interesting article of Bernard when he said that the MBS, I mean the prime minister, if I might say, of Saudi Arabia, is very much willing to go into a broader society, an open society, but he needs to have concession, and he needs to be guaranteed on the level of security. So my view, and I'm answering dans le désordre, like we say, is that first, Saudi Arabia is going to resume the talks concerning the integration of joining the Abraham Accords. I don't know when this will happen, but I see, and this is the only stable thing that I can see within the geopolitical landscape today, is that Iran is the only country that has not moved, that has not changed its idea. Iran has been very much eager in building up a system that was a very successful one of having states, communities all around the Middle East, and trying to have them as a pathway of influence. I cannot see Iran getting rid immediately or abiding by the new ideas that are being, talked about in the Middle East. So we won't have elections in the immediate future in Lebanon, because the discussion is much more important that Iran has today is about the nuclear power of Iran. This is of the utmost importance. And people are saying that in 2 months we will be forgetting Gaza and talking about the nuclear threat, because meanwhile the enrichment of uranium is going on, and the question of Iran having a nuclear weapon will be again on the table. So what I can see is an opening of the Arab countries towards the United States, as long as Iran constitutes a threat to their stability. This has not changed. Iran has not changed. The stakes related to security in the Gulf area has not changed. We have been witnessing China being a mediator between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and all of a sudden it has completely disappeared. And China is not willing to get involved into politics in the Middle East, but it is willing, of course, to have a say in the economic affairs. Russia is very much concerned by Ukraine, but it is sticking to what it has immediately in terms of strategic foothold in Syria, being in Tartus or in whole Syria. So we are left with a politics of the United States that will be back again, and we'll have to discuss the issue of politics of Biden or Trump. I mean, the United States are bound to be back in the Middle East. Funny enough, you remember, Karim, in 2014 or 2015, when Obama has completely changed the foreign policy of the United States, saying it's high time for the American foreign policy to pivot towards China, or toward the East. And now he is now back again. And funny enough, or ironically enough, he is the only broker in this area. And it is a very ambiguous situation for the United States today. They are sticking to Israel, letting Israel continue its military job till the end, and at the same time preparing for a program that would include, of peace program, that would include the creation of the Palestinian state. So if you think about another foreign state that would be able today to strike a deal concerning the solution in the region, you won't find anybody. So we are left with the Americans, and we are left with the Israeli arrogance, I must say, and we have to deal with that. And the Iranian is the perceived, it's a perception of being the power that is endangering, if I might say, the whole stability, or the stability of the whole Gulf area and the whole Middle East. So after Gaza, we have to think, after that, how are we going to diffuse tensions? And we will be confronted to other cases of conflicts. And Karim, you have entitled this conversation "Decoding." It's decoding, yeah, it was decoding Gaza, and Gaza was an element that has widened the scope of all the conflict related to the Israeli-Arab conflict. And we have now the Iranian on the agenda, the Syrian, we have the Houthi, we have the borders in southern Lebanon, all
Joe,
of this.
I know we are approaching the end of this section, but I see three questions on the chat that are pretty much the same questions from George Saadi, Mayad Sleiman, and Michel Ghazal. Basically, most of them are focusing on the viability of the state of Israel. To what extent do you agree with the commentators who say that Israel is a fragile state, that Israel might be winning militarily but is losing in the court of international public opinion? Do you think that Israel can maintain its military occupation and dominance without paying a price politically and economically? Do you agree with those who say that basically Israeli policies are simply unsustainable, and as soon as they lose the unconditional American support, Israel will be forced to completely change its model and accept equality?
I don't agree with this view, Karim. I think that Israel is a strong state, a fragile society, unlike Lebanon, which is a strong society, I mean, communitarian way of envisaging society, and a very fragile state. No, Israel, we have to have it. When you compare Israel to Palestinian, to Gaza, or to Lebanon even, you have a GDP in Gaza and of the Israeli state, which amount $500 billion. In Lebanon, we have a GDP of around 20 billion, I think, today. I'm not talking about the Gaza Strip GDP. It means what? It's not enough to have a strong economy. I agree with you. It means that you have a very dynamic society that is creating, improving, it is as if Bangladesh and Sweden were neighbors, if you consider the situation. So I agree with people, and especially when you have to deal with people from the IMF of the World Bank, they indicate that this region is a very imbalanced one in terms of the distribution of wealth in these countries. So for the moment being, Israel is a strong state defending itself and trying to create or to recreate, if I might say, the deterrence it used to have, and it has completely lost. That's why we are witnessing this barbarian attack on the Gaza Strip, as if, I mean, creating a new disaster of or creating a situation in which there is no houses, no population would guarantee them that are going to be strong enough. But this is the way they are considering the losing of their deterrence. And I think, and they are wrong, that they could restore a kind of deterrence credibility, fighting a people that has nothing to oppose to the huge weaponry of Israel. So I don't see Israel being on the verge of disappearing today. But what I can foresee, if I want to think about the question, is that on the long run, the most sensitive issue that would be at stake is the challenge that would be put to Israel to be able to be part, an integrative part of the Middle East, and to coexist and to deal with different political system, different cultural system, and feel for the Israeli citizen that they are part of this region. Would they be accepted as citizens someday in the Arab world? It will be very difficult. But for the moment being, I mean, sticking to their force and leading the political strengths or the military strength that they are doing now, and having a strong, don't forget that you have a country that has been at war for 4 months today, and for the first time people are saying, well, it's about 1 point or 1.5 of the GDP. And maybe this would be compensated by the money that the United States will lend or would give to Israel, about 14 billion, I think, of dollars. So for the moment being, they are managing in such a way that they are very strong on the level of defending themselves and trying to be deeply rooted in Israel and in the economic system of Israel. But on the long run, integration is another question. And integration is not a matter of military superiority. It's a matter of feeling part of this region and very much able to socialize, to enter into relations, to have good relationships with your environment. And this will be someday the most important challenge that Israel will be faced with.
Thank you, Joseph. We also have an important question on the chat about the consequences of a Trump election. This is the elephant in the room, the orange elephant. Will he give carte blanche to Israel to proceed with a complete devastation of Gaza and eventually of Lebanon and Iran? But I guess you are not going to enter into projection.
No, I'm going to enter that because you noticed the last statement of Putin yesterday. He said, I prefer Biden. But because Biden is predictable and Trump is totally unpredictable. So he knows how to behave if and only if, of course, Biden is reelected. So I don't see it's very difficult to tell about the behavior of Trump, really. But I see Trump returning and fostering and implementing and going ahead with the Abraham agreements, which is, Karim, the only roadmap left today, even for the Saudis, even for the Israelis, for the Kuwaitis, maybe if they want to join someday, for the Emirates, of course, the Arab United Emirates, they are already part in this. And this would be the most, I mean, we can tell about the politics, the policy that Trump will follow in the Gulf area. It will be the Abraham Accord. I'm not
But
sure
you
that
mean Abraham
Biden-
Accords 2.0, taking into consideration the Palestinian question?
Sorry?
I assume you are talking about Abraham Accords 2.0, meaning they will have to take into consideration the
Exactly.
Palestinian question and can no longer evade it.
Exactly. It will be part of the Abraham Accord. If you go back to the map of the Abraham Accord, you will be, of course, surprised, but you will not be surprised because you know all this. There is no Palestinian state. There is a Palestinian area, and it's up to Israel to decide about its relationship with an area in which you have Palestinians. I think that this is definitely out of reach. You have to think about having a Palestinian state. Nobody, even the Palestinians, I mean, the Palestinians for sure, and nobody in the Arab world will be accepting less than having a Palestinian state in the region. This
We're
is
running out of time, but our partner Karim Hatim of Change Lebanon has a final question.
Thank you, Karim. Well, I would not like to open a new debate because we have
No,
already been
No,
over
please.
time, but I would just make one comment and one wish. My comment is to what you said, Joseph, about accepting Israelis as citizens. If you look back into history, there is no real antagonism between the Arabs and the Jews.
Yes, of course.
I mean, if you look at the history of Jews during the 19th and the 20th century, and even back to Isabelle la Catholique, Arab countries are probably the places where they have been the best treated. Of course, there has been some skirmishes here and there, but basically you have had no pogroms, no genocide. So, I mean, the antagonism between Arabs and the Jews is a fabrication of the 20th century. It's mostly consequence of Israel. And when you see at which speed the connection has been made between Arab countries and Israelis, economic ties, etc., I'm not sure there is such a deep antagonism as the one that exists between the Germans and the French, for example, which even this one has been overcome after First World War and Second World War. So we should be aware of that, because for Lebanon, this has some consequences, which is we are already being replaced and disrupted in our traditional role as being a kind of bridge between this famous historical bridge that the Swiss of the Orient would create between Oriental and Occidental world.
Brokers. Yeah.
Now,
Karim,
my wish is
sorry.
just at the end is, I think we've had a very good, we're not at the conclusion yet, but we are really close to it. But one of the following issues that we could process is to try to determine, according to different scenarios, even if we have assumptions about the most probable one, what would be a proper strategy for Lebanon?
Yeah.
Are there some common grounds, some policy actions that should be taken, whatever the future, and which are the specific actions that should be depending on the probability of this or this scenario? This would be helpful because my assumption is that, of course, most of what has to be done anyway. But maybe in some cases we have to prepare to 2 or 3 options that may exist.
Yeah.
One of them being that Lebanon is not left behind of an economic redevelopment of the region within the framework of Abraham Accords, whether they would be 2.0, 3.0 or not.
Yeah.
Whenever there is an academic conference at a university in Europe or in Lebanon, Joseph Maila is always asked to do the final conclusions, the synthesis.
Thank you, Karim. Thank you to both,
So
Karim.
today,
I don't want to make a synthesis, of course, but I want to answer the last question, which was very much interesting. I agree with you, Karim Hatim, concerning the relationships between the Jews and the Arabs, be them Muslims or Christian. This is completely right. Although you would, at the beginning of this, the 20th century, we had a pogrom in 1929 in Hebron and some areas, but forget about that. But I was not talking about that. I was talking about the political level. As far as there was no idea of creating a Palestinian state, on the level of the communitarian or the communities relation, things were excellent, or going very smoothly, if I might say. But when you enter with your political ideas that you should have a state and you should create the state with support of a colonial mind in order to be settled in a region from which you were no longer part since the destruction of the temple in 70 after Christ, and that after that you want to create a state and to be and to deal with a population that you were compelled, or it was designed as such to expel in order to make room for the Israeli state. Yes, at this point, the interfering of the political approaches with the relationships between Arabs and Jews have had a tremendous and a terrible impact on the relationship. So we must be, I mean, very much hopeful and trying to get, I mean, to be able someday to go beyond all these tensions. This is my wish, Karim Hatim, my inner and deep wish, that we could build up a community of people that live together. But the state of Israel has to change completely its vision, its approach. They have to think over its role in the Middle East, its place within the other countries. But we have to pray in order to have that being implemented or realized someday. It's a big achievement, but it will be a cultural achievement, not a military one.
Cultural revolution. Thank you, Joseph Maila, for these beautiful final words of wisdom. Thank you all for being with us. We are very happy to have partnered with Change Lebanon for this event, and we will be in touch. We will inform you of future events as soon as possible to continue this series. Thank you all for being with us at this particularly dangerous juncture in Middle Eastern history. But with as long as there are wise humanists like Joseph Maila around, there is still some hope.
Thank you, Karim. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. Bye-bye.